Welcome to your weekly dose of NFL Jibber Jabber, the Club Dub Football Podcast. Remember to follow on Twitter, Insta, and watch video shows each week on YouTube. Want to get in touch? That's easy. Message through social or email clubdubpodcast@mail.com.
Welcome to the
Club Dub Football Podcast,
where the only question is,
does your team make it into the club?
Can he get in? No, he cannot!
Welcome back, gentlemen.
Hi, Rob.
Well, we're on our summertime schedule, as JB called it. I like that. So these are the short but sweet, useful and informative, compact bijou podcasts that get us through these quiet phases of the off-season and keep all of those wonderful NFL fans up to date with all of the really big news. And I say really big news because this is ultimately going to be a recap for us, with free agency still tumbling along and a couple of big names still on the table who will no doubt find a home somewhere. We're basically going to draw a line in the sand before we shift our focus to the upcoming draft and talk about who are the winners and losers, in your opinion, really through this first and, let's be honest, the meaty and most exciting phase of NFL free agency. So there's a couple of obvious ones that'll take us to the big news stories of the last few weeks. There's a couple where, I expect a bit of debate and potential disagreement. But with no Aldrin, with just myself, JB and PB, a kind of triangular formation that we've gone for this week, we need somebody else to go first. So as so much of the big news of the last couple of weeks surrounds action in the Bay, PB, why don't you kick us off with one of the definite winners overall, but what's going on with Tampa Bay and how do you feel about the changes at the top?
Yeah, I mean, it didn't look like we were going to be winners very early in the off-season with Brady's retirement and, the look that we were going to lose a number of key free agents. They thought we wouldn't be able to keep Godwin and wouldn't be able to keep Davis as well. If we franchise tag Godwin, which we did, it looked like Jensen was going to go to the Bengals. That was the good rumor. And, it looked like Fournette was going to go, playoff Lenny, Lombardi Lenny, whatever you want to call him. And it all felt a little bit like, we've had a couple of good years and now we're going to go back to, maybe struggling over the next couple of years. And then it takes, one social media post from Tom Brady and the world looks a lot rosier again. So Brady, obviously unretired, 42 days or whatever it was at home, was enough for him. Still got the fire there, going to watch Manchester United and seeing Ronaldo score a couple of goals against Spurs, obviously relit his fire. So, it all looks a bit rosier, within hours of that being announced. It was announced that Jensen was actually going to stay at the Bucs. We lost Kappa, who's been a mainstay of our offensive line over the last few years. And Brady tried to keep him as well, but ultimately he went for more money and another opportunity in Cincinnati. So that's a shame. But we tagged Godwin, then managed to get him signed to a 3-year deal. We signed Davis. We've signed Lenny again, Leonard Fournette. So, and we've got other key pieces back as well. Marpet retired, which is a massive loss. A big hole for us there at left guard next to Donovan Smith. But we've signed Shaq Mason from the Patriots. We traded for him, which is obviously another familiar face that Brady knows. We lost Jordan Whitehead, which is again another big blow to our defense, but we've replaced him with Logan Ryan, who's played with Brady at the Patriots. So it kind of feels like we're getting that, we've got some good pieces back together to replace those that we've lost. So I think, you would kind of argue that we're probably winners, especially where it looked like, 3 or 4 weeks ago versus, what we were looking like then at potentially a Kyle Trask or Blaine Gabbert run team, losing all our free agents. So it's another positive outlook for us this season, off season, I think. And if you look at the rest of the division, the Falcons traded away Matt Ryan and they're going with Marcus Mariota, which I don't think will be a horrendous choice for them. But, we've picked up Russell Gage from them. Calvin Ridley's obviously suspended. So they've kind of not really got any, they re-signed Cordarrelle Patterson, who was their main outlet last year. But, I don't think they're going to be much to worry about. Carolina, who knows what's going on with them at quarterback. And then the Saints, are going with Jameis again. They've signed Andy Dalton as insurance as well, but they've had to blow their roster up a little bit in terms of their salary cap issues. So, considering we thought, we're going to be in a tricky division where none of them are particularly good, actually, it probably looks good for us. Although we've got a tough schedule this year, it probably looks good for us topping the division. And then once you're in the playoffs, who knows what can happen. But the bigger thing for me, I think, is the fact that those free agents that we have re-signed, so Godwin, Davis, Fournette, they've all re-signed on 3-year contracts. So it's not it's not like we've only got them tied down for a year and then we're going to be in a worse position next year. Actually, if Brady does retire or go to San Francisco or whatever at the end of this season, we're kind of set up to be in a lot better position for whoever comes in to replace him, be that Trask or somewhere else. And obviously the big news then is that Arians is retired, which all kind of came out of the blue. It felt a little bit sudden. And there's a lot of talk about Brady, whether it was a Brady and him clash or something along those lines, or whether it was health related, but kind of both of those rumours have been quashed. And I guess it kind of does feel, as a man who kind of succession is important to him. He's stated that on a number of occasions, and he's given opportunities to a lot of, minority and female coaches, in his time, not just at the Bucs, but at Arizona as well. I think, that point about having people tied down for the next 3 years, having Brady back this season and knowing we should be a decent team, it probably made sense to him to then hand the reins over to Todd Bowles. And I think it's good, Todd Bowles has transformed our defense over the last 2 years. So I think teams were sniffing around him and we would lose him at the end of this season anyway, if we didn't make him head coach at the end of this season. So, it feels like a good, it feels like it was a bit of a rush decision and they're putting him straight into the Hall of Fame, Arians, this year. But it feels like I think a decent move. It would be a shame to, not see him in his Kangol hat chuffing on a cigar and all that kind of stuff. But, what a 3 years it was under him.
I think you've pretty much nailed that as an overall summation of the Bucs. I think the Brady factor was huge. The way that the front office have worked, signing people to long deals. I mean, I don't know. I'm sick of trying to predict what goes on with Brady, but you've got to imagine maybe at 45 is he now? I'm trying to think where we're even up to. But at 45 years old, you've got to imagine he won't be playing at 48. But what do I know? So yeah, getting people to 3-year deals makes a lot of sense. Equally, the division around you, I think that's another perfectly fair call. And yeah, the Arians thing is a bit odd, isn't it? When he was the head coach of the Cardinals, his then retirement, obviously a bit Brady-esque, didn't last an awfully long time, but his then retirement came out the blue. I think in the locker room speech after we beat the Seahawks that season, final game of the season, he said he didn't know he was going to retire until that final field goal went over. But yeah, I think this feels a little different. If for no other reason that he's got a Lombardi, I think, when you've then won a Super Bowl, you'd wonder if he was to come back again. Obviously, a few more years have passed. He was already an aging coach, really. But to come back after everything he's achieved seems so unlikely. Yeah, and you're right. I mean, I would love to know what the reasons are. And the only thing that makes me think there must be something, PB, is just the timing. Everything else kind of marries up quite nicely, with Bowles and with Leftwich and actually with the coaches, like I say, back to his time that I followed so closely in Arizona. You did see that belief in progressing and developing coaches around him. But yeah, the timing is just the really odd one. Obviously not derailed any of the feel good though, because you're absolutely right. Loads of great talent in, loads of reasonable length contracts for that talent. So even if Brady moves on, you can almost imagine being in a situation similar to the Colts maybe, where in a couple of years you are a win now team who just needs a quarterback. And I know it's not quite as easy as I'm making it sound, but it certainly gives you a better chance, I think, for long-term success. And who knows, could get better yet. I mean, Gronkowski, I don't know, I thought it was going to be a bit of a formality that he would sign once Brady was back, and it's not quite been that. But yeah, you've got to feel there could be even more good news coming the way of Tampa Bay in the weeks ahead. Brady certainly is a bit of a lighthouse, isn't he, for NFL free agents. They all seem to find their way to him. So, yeah, another good year for Tampa Bay, no doubt at all. JB, if we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as our first winner of free agency. I hand over to you, sir. Who do you pick and why?
So again, like my first choice, if PB hadn't got there, was going to be the Bucks, because regardless of any other movements that you make, getting the greatest player of all time to come back and play for your team, you kind of got to give him that one for it.
Huge.
So I am going to look in a different conference. I'm going to look in the opposite direction of the compass, and I'm going to look in division at the Cincinnati Bengals. And I think, as everyone will know from kind of the history of the podcast recently, for a Steelers fan, I've been incredibly high on the Bengals, obviously for personal reasons, as well as kind of just they've been a good team to watch. But obviously going into the Super Bowl, we talked about the biggest problem being that Bengals offensive line. And that was the thing, I think, really that contributed to their downfall in the Super Bowl. It was the fact that they just couldn't match up and do what they need to do and give Joe Burrow the time to make a play and make a throw, as we'd seen throughout the rest of the season. So what have they done? Well, they've gone and got Lyle Collins, formerly of the Cowboys. They've gone and got the aforementioned Alex Kappa from the Bucks, and then they've got Ted Karras, who spent 5 of his 6 seasons with the Patriots, who aren't a scrub team when it comes to offensive line performance. So I think they've, rather than spending big like teams like the Raiders who traded for Davonte Adams, or the Patriots who traded for Devontae Parker, or the Vikings who managed to sell like Zadarius Smith, rather than making a big splash play, what they've done instead is look at, okay, where are the weaknesses in our team? Let's fix those. Let's not, which some teams do, let's not put strength on top of strength. Let's fix the weaknesses instead. And I think they've gone and done a really, really good job of that. So you kind of have to look at this point saying, well, if the Bengals perform like they performed last year with a team that is now set up stronger than they were last year, you've got to think, well, the result will surely be better. And the only thing better is a Super Bowl. So I'm not saying all clear Super Bowl favorites, but if you look at the math, individual, on paper, weaknesses minus the, strengths fixing weaknesses equals success. So there we go.
I think there's 2 big points to take away there. I mean, you'd, I don't know, maybe this is a bit of a bizarre one, but to kind of almost turn Phil's previous point about the Bucks on his head, if the AFC generally didn't feel so stacked at the top, you'd feel a lot more maybe buoyant about the Bengals. I think you're right. It's been a very long time since Cincinnati made what you could call considered kind of hires, and bought in talent just to fix a couple of key areas. I'm still a little worried about them defensively, but then you can say that about a lot of kind of offensive powerhouses. And, if that form down the stretch is something that, we can come to expect as the norm for Cincinnati, much as we have with teams like Kansas City, it does feel like some really smart moves. And Duke Tobin, who's brought these players in, deserves a bit of credit here because, a couple of years ago, they were nowhere, weren't they? I mean, you talked about the lengthy playoff drought. You talked about the squandered generation of talent that they'd had kind of in the mid-noughties and those years between probably 2007 to 2012. It just felt they were a long way away. And look at them now. I mean, compare this team to, say, who was floundering? I suppose the Jets, were another team that probably feel, they would need to take a massive step. The Texans maybe. It shows how quickly it can turn around with a great young quarterback. And I love that. I think Lyle Collins and I also think, Alex Kappa, they're just absolutely plug and play upgrades, aren't they? I mean, you can't imagine that offensive unit being anything but better than they were this time last year. And I mean, I don't know, what was I'm trying to think. Joe Burrow was sacked, more than 5 times in the Super Bowl. You put Joe Burrow in big games with a bit more protection, it could be a recipe for long-term success with the Bengals. So yeah, I'm with you.
you historically, and cue up the bread music if you want, historically you look at teams that have succeeded and you look at that offensive line being the strength of it. And I'm thinking of the then Washington Redskins and kind of the success they had, like, Joe Gibbs, we love the coach, only coach in history to win 3 Super Bowls with 3 different starting quarterbacks. And part of that was because of the hogs up in front, kind of giving all the time to guys like Joe Theismann, and Doug Williams, formerly of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and like Mark Rippon. Mark Rippon has a Super Bowl win in part because of offensive line play, giving him the time he needed to just throw the bomb. And that was their move, and no one can stop you doing it. We look at the success the Cowboys had both in the 90s and kind of recently with their offensive line. You look like all of that kind of stuff powers what you do. So yeah, Bengals have spent the money where they need to while they're not having to pay Joe Burrow superstar quarterback money.
Yeah, I think that absolutely sums up. It is a well-trodden path to success, but when you've got those other pieces, why not? I think that absolutely works. So I'm going to roll round to I'm going to have to say a winner, but mine is a lot more simple and straightforward. Mine is the Indianapolis Colts, who are a winner in a weird way for one very obvious reason and a couple of less obvious reasons. And I'll probably loop the Rams in, not that I want to do a 2-in-1 here, but there's kind of a similar tale to be told for me about both teams. So let's start with the obvious reason why the Indianapolis Colts have got better. They've just put Matty Ice at quarterback. And as much as we're talking about a guy who is probably past his league MVP peak, I think we said on the podcast only a couple of weeks ago, he's not far beyond it. We've still got a guy who's demonstrating great arm strength, the ability to move the ball down the field, actually the ability to be creative even when plays break down. He was in a limited kind of fledgling offense that felt like it was still finding its way last season. And I think when you look at the Colts, post kind of Andrew Luck, they've been trying to fill that gap. And I thought the Phillip Rivers move was kind of sensible in a number of ways. This is a guy who has a proven track record, a really good, reliable quarterback, great locker room and team leader, somebody who could elevate the Colts. And for me, they probably got Phillip Rivers, a year too late, and sadly only 4 a year. Now, the Carson Wentz trade, I wasn't necessarily that down on it. But it didn't work out. The tail end of the season didn't go well. So how on earth can you not have the Indianapolis Colts as winners when they not only upgrade massively at quarterback by bringing Matt Ryan in, but they also manage to move an utterly ridiculous salary number from their roster by sending Carson Wentz to Washington to be the first quarterback of the newly named Commanders. I just think that is a super bit of business. And as much as we sometimes look at those teams that bring in a star player, and, Matt Ryan is definitely ticking that box for the Colts, you've also got to look at the way they've managed that cap number. Getting rid of Wentz and all of those millions that he was due, I think is a stroke of genius. And the reason I mention the Rams is, I think we'll come to the Rams at some point on this pod. But to get the Robert Woods money off their wage bill, off that cap number, by being able to find a suitor, even for a couple of lowly picks, but being able to find a suitor for Robert Woods is just another brilliant bit of business. And it's those people who are able to keep their squads talent rich through those types of moves. I think, they're set up for really good levels of long-term success. The other thing with Matt Ryan that I feel, and I could be proved wrong, but I think Matt Ryan has probably got a few years left in him. I can imagine him playing for, say, the next 3 years. So it feels a slightly more permanent move than Rivers. It feels slightly more long-term. And rather than having to think about rebuilding, having to think about what you might do with a journeyman quarterback or building around a young quarterback, and look, you can have success with either of those at times, they get to basically stick with the plan with an upgrade for the most important position on the field. So yeah, Indianapolis Colts would be a big winner for me with just that move alone, frankly.
I think the Wentz trade works out for both parties, because I actually think he gives the Commanders better quarterback play than the football team. Certainly the football team had last year with Fitzmagic, who only played a couple of games, and Henney. And more than the year before when they had, I can't even remember who they had the year before, Smith, Henney again.
Alex
I can't
Smith
remember
and
who else they had.
Heineke,
Kyle Allen. Like I think, I know I've slated Wentz, but I don't think all of the Colts' problems were down to him last year.
No.
They didn't lose in Jacksonville on the last game of the season just because of Carson Wentz. And at the same time, if they'd won that, they'd have got the playoffs, and it probably would look a little bit different.
Yeah,
I'm
different
not so
story.
sure they would have traded him away. So, it's one game in essence is torpedoed that, albeit, you don't know what goes on behind the scenes. So you don't know if anything's, if he wasn't liked in the locker room or whatever, it all seems a little bit touchy. So for me, I think it's just one of those ones that works out for all parties. Matt Ryan is still seemingly has it. He didn't have a great season with the Falcons, but as we've already said, the Falcons haven't really got any weapons.
Yeah.
They had no real running attack last year. The only, run and kind of great receiver performance they had was from Cordarrelle Patterson that came from absolutely nowhere. He's shown no kind of real aptitude for that over his NFL career so far, apart from being an amazing returner. And then, that season just gets pulled from nowhere. So I think Matt Ryan, with the weapons that they've got there, one of the best running attacks in the league. I think that it's probably going to be a trade that works out for them, definitely.
Yeah, I love the Colts. I do agree with your Wentz point. I think, ultimately Washington, a bit like Jacksonville, a lot of people have been down on Jacksonville for paying, people like Christian Kirk such big money, and it is too much money. But I think we've said it before, cap space doesn't win you games. If you've got it and maybe you're not a particularly fancy destination, pay the money, improve your roster. And I think, Washington, Jacksonville, a couple of others who've maybe been slated for their moves have done exactly that. It's an interesting point you mentioned about the running attack. I think, we've seen with, in the Falcons era with Matt Ryan, when they had that running attack, they were able to do some really exciting things. And I don't know, maybe you could challenge me on this. There was a very good team, in Atlanta when they made the Super Bowl. But I think this is probably one of the best, if not the best running attacks in the league, and probably the best running attack Matt Ryan's ever played with. So, you got to keep people healthy. You've got to avoid injuries like any team going into any season. But if they can do that, I think there's really good things ahead for Indianapolis.
So part of what I disagree with in what you kind of said was that they maybe got Phillip Rivers a year too late and only for a year. And I kind of think, well, no, I think Phillip Rivers was already the Phillip Rivers that we saw like a year or two before that. I think some, if not all of it, was covered by the fact that the Chargers were just that snake bit team, that injury prone team. And you kind of make excuses for the fact that, oh, well, look what he's trying to do with what he's got around him. I think this almost feels like a mulligan for the Colts. I think them getting this version of Matt Ryan is what they were hoping they were going to get with Phillip Rivers. I think this is a former league MVP who can still do exactly what you need a quarterback to do. He's very much that prototypical pocket passer, but we have still seen him make some plays with his legs. He's not like, and apologies for potentially taking a shot at Phil's quarterback here, but it's not like that Eagles Patriots Super Bowl where they threw the ball to Brady and he was just too slow to catch the ball. Like, the play was perfect, but Brady just didn't have it in him. You see Matt Ryan still got that oomph. He's still got a bit of that fire to compete. And that Super Bowl loss is probably something that's driving him on. And yeah, I would kind of agree. This is probably the best team and the best organizational setup he's had to succeed since that team. The Falcons are doing something. They're kind of getting rid of everybody, I'm assuming, to try and start again from scratch, but it's absolutely from scratch. If you're putting all of your eggs in the Cordarrelle Patterson basket of being able to replicate what he did last season, that's a big gamble to make. Like, don't get me wrong, it was an incredible performance, but kind of like Phil said, there's been absolutely nothing that we have seen from him outside of his I was drafted in the first round pedigree to suggest he can do anything like this again. So it's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see how it plays out for them.
I think I would feel I don't lack confidence in Patterson. I just think the problem is a bit like the challenge in Green Bay, although it's a very different situation. Who's around him? It just feels like the supporting cast is just pretty much non-existent. But yeah, it sounds like we're all good on the Indianapolis Colts. So before we get to the losers of free agency, are there any other honourable mentions that you'd like to throw out as a winner, PB? Coming to you next. Any other winners for free agency, please?
Chargers, maybe. I think the Chargers have done really well. Some big additions on the defensive side of the ball in particular. Khalil Mack, I'm thinking of guys like that. And I also think, I just had one and this completely slipped out of my mind. The Raiders, I think.
Yeah.
Picking up Davonte Adams, arguably the best receiver in the league at the moment.
Well, they've paid him as if he's definitely the best receiver in the league. I mean,
well, exactly.
They are all in on Davonte Adams, aren't they?
It's a strange one, though, isn't it? Because Green Bay let him go. The way, is it Gutenkutz, or however you pronounce his surname, the GM?
I'll go with that. Yeah.
Yeah. He kind of insinuated that they traded him, they let him go because he wanted to move closer to home in Vegas and all that. But then you normally would get a hometown discount, right? Or give a hometown discount if you're going to a team, where you want to be there. But it doesn't really feel like he's done that. So that could cost them, further down the line when he's a little bit older. But I think that's a win for them. It gives them a threat that they, they had some good receiving threats. They got one of the better tight ends in Darren Waller, who's a really good receiver. But I think, Adams is a different proposition for them.
I love both picks. I think with the Chargers, you look at JC Jackson is just a brilliant pickup. Whoever he'd have gone to, he'd have made a secondary better. But I like the pickup of Khalil Mack, particularly as just a member of the supporting cast. This is a guy who'll be playing with Joey Bosa rather than being the number one man himself. So I think the Chargers definitely got better. The only thing that worries me about the Raiders, and it is the only thing that worries me, is they've really paid the big names, really big money. So not only have you got Adams, who, has the stats to suggest he probably is, if not the best wide receiver in football, one of the top three. So I don't mind that kind of money. The Chandler Jones money feels a big amount of money. And I mean, Chandler Jones has still got years ahead of him, still only in his early 30s. We've seen pass rushers, stay effective for far longer than that. But certainly a bit like Buffalo have done, by paying their big name players and bringing in big name free agents. It feels like it's the kind of money that they're relying on Chandler Jones being a big name. I think you could probably tick both boxes. The Raiders have spent the money. The Chargers, I think, have been a little more wily, creating kind of a Rams 2.0, in that stadium in LA. I'll take those as two winners. JB, honourable mentions from you, please.
No, let's get to the good bit.
Oh, okay. Shall I do a couple of honourable mentions? I think the Denver Broncos get better because they've got Russell Wilson. I think whatever you have to pay, that is a massive upgrade. Is there anyone else I'd want to mention as an honourable mention?
Dolphins,
got to be.
Come to think of it, Tyreek Hill. I think that's a good pickup for them.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, another receiver who's been paid as if he's the best receiver in football, but I think he's there or thereabouts. It's a big splash for the Dolphins, and I like that from a first-year head coach. I certainly like it because I think it gives Tua a number of big opportunities. And I'll mention them only quickly. The Tennessee Titans, for the same reason I mentioned the Rams, they've got an awful lot of money off their cap, and they've added, they've paid a lot of money for the likes of Robert Woods. But again, it's a player that makes them better, and I never mind a team spending the cap space they've got if it's the type of talent that could really improve what they can do on the football field. So the Titans, for a couple of kind of beneath the radar moves, I think have kept themselves relevant in a division where I think the Colts will be strong. I think that was important. So go on then, JB. The loser of free agency for you can go first as you've led us to this point.
I believe it is the Fighting Pride of Green Bay, Wisconsin. I think the Packers, because you have to balance up what you have won versus what you have lost. And what they have won is retaining the services of Aaron Rodgers, undoubtedly one of the best players of his position of all time. However, you look down the list of people that they've kind of said goodbye to, and that includes Davonte Adams, Equanimeous St. Brown, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, who were essentially their top 3 wide receivers for, 2-3 seasons, really? And you don't see a lot of teams have a great amount of success replacing their top 3 wide receivers a season after. You have the argument of, can Aaron Rodgers make everybody look good? Maybe, but at the same time, Aaron Rodgers has always had Davonte Adams, and he's kind of campaigned for better wide receivers. Like, how many times have we heard the news story of Aaron Rodgers is upset with the Packers after the draft because they didn't give him any weapons? What they've now done is they've basically said, hey, Aaron, congratulations. Here's a lot of money. Oh, FYI, you know how you wanted us to draft receivers? We've got rid of receivers. But it also goes a little bit deeper than that, because they've also lost Zadarius Smith, who I kind of mentioned earlier, who was a really, really good piece on their defense. I don't want to say like a revelation, but really, really contributed exactly when they need to. And it's difficult to replace players like that as well. The draft is coming up, but you can't replace everything you need in the draft here if we're looking at what the Packers have gaps for. And with the Vikings getting stronger as a team, but still retaining Kirk Cousins for reasons, and a Lions team that in theory you've got to think have to be better this year, maybe. It kind of opens it a lot, and kind of the Bears with Justin Fields now as starter and kind of a new head coach and a new motivation behind the team. You've got to kind of think, well, everyone's got at least a little bit stronger around us. Have we got stronger? Have we stayed static, or have we actually got a little bit worse? And that's kind of why I circle back to them. I think honourable mention probably be to the Broncos. I think giving up all of that for Russell Wilson, it's not gonna get them anywhere.
You were absolutely tied to the Broncos, but I mean, they made an honourable mention for good reason. I mean, tell me who they lost that was better than Russell Wilson. I think that is a phenomenal bit of business. I am with you with Green Bay. I think it sounds like Rodgers signed for the big money knowing that Adams was probably on his way out. I am surprised that other receivers have gone. But equally, I think when you've got Jones, I mean, Randall Cobb on the roster feels bizarre to me. It feels like there is still hope. If they were to be able to pick up one of the, good receivers in the draft, maybe they're only a receiver away. I mean, it feels like a room that needs work. I'm not convinced.
Asked, I don't know if you know this about Green Bay, but you can ask the GM. I think it's a weekly segment or something on their website or something like that. Obviously, being a fan-owned team, it's entirely unique to them. And somebody asked, literally made the point, you've traded away all our receivers. What's the plan? What are you thinking? And he kind of suggested, I think they've got 4 picks in the first 2 rounds, which they can, you can pick up good receivers in the draft, or there are still, veterans available on the market, or there are people available for trade. So he kind of intimated that they're going to do some business, but I don't, I think Devontae Parker's a massive loss. I'm not sure about St. Brown and Valdez-Scantling. I don't know how.
Devontae Adams rather than Devontae Parker. I think Devontae Parker was a loss for the Dolphins. But otherwise, I think your point holds water. I mean, the only thing I would say is, and I do get it, because losing receiver 2 and receiver 3 feels like it only compounds the problem. But if Davonte Adams was going, he's not easy to replace, is he? I mean, as a 1-for-1 receiver, and once you've paid Rodgers all that money, I still think they're the best team in that division. And I think, to your point, Phil, with 1 or 2 recruits, I think they are comfortably the best team in that division. But yeah, it's funny because you look beyond Tom Brady and you can kind of see some green shoots for Tampa Bay with the type of business they've done. You take Rodgers out of Green Bay, and I think that's very different. It feels like two very different sets of circumstances all of a sudden. A fair shout, the Green Bay Packers.
To be fair, it makes the Jordan Love pick even more strange, doesn't it? 2 years on or whatever it is. Like, if Rodgers was going to, unless they genuinely thought Rodgers was going to either hang them up or force a trade or something like that. But then, why don't they shop him? I don't know. Maybe they want him as an insurance blanket in case Rodgers does decide one off season to just go. But it's odd.
I think the Green Bay Packers should know Aaron Rodgers better than anybody else on the planet does. And I think those same Green Bay Packers would think you can't predict anything that Aaron Rodgers is going to do. To borrow I think it's a Rowdy Roddy Piper line, just when you think you know the answers, Aaron Rodgers changes the questions. And this is a guy we have seen like motivate himself through what have at times felt like the absolute pettiest of reasons.
Yeah.
And like one thing we've talked about with Brady, haven't we? Like since the very beginning, like when he was drafted as late as he was, he's used that as a chip on his shoulder to motivate himself forward. So I think having a quarterback that does that is it's no surprise to a degree. It's what everybody would want. But yeah, I think it does create kind of an unpredictability where the Packers did kind of think, well, we were lucky. Because it was luck. We were lucky in the fact that we managed to go from Hall of Fame quarterback Brett Favre to Hall of Fame quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Yeah. The chances of you then being able to go to Hall of Fame quarterback, enter name here, is got to be like even Phil wouldn't bet on odds on that on the length of the national anthem. So you've got to take a chance.
I think you're right that it is run like a franchise that does not quite realise. I mean, not only are we talking Hall of Fame Brett Favre to Hall of Fame Aaron Rodgers, for a lot of armchair fans, they'd probably have both of those quarterbacks in the top 5 all time. They're right at the top of the tree. But yeah, I don't know. I fear a bit for Green Bay. The unpredictability of Rodgers. I mean, nothing is impossible. But then equally, I'll go back to my previous point. I think there are a couple of signings away from things looking a bit brighter. The only thing that feels a bit odd, and I'm largely on board with Phil's point, but you feel like any rookie you bring in, and it's the old cliche, isn't it? It takes a while for the game to slow down for them. And I think if you imagine your receiver 1 and receiver 2 are both rookies, it feels an odd situation to be in when Aaron Rodgers certainly isn't getting any younger. But yeah, go on then. Yeah, I think Green Bay's a fair shout. I'm not arguing overall. PB, loser of free agency for me, please. And there's still quite a few on the board. Who are you going to go for?
I think probably the Seattle Seahawks. They're in one of the toughest divisions. You could probably pick the 3 other teams in that division as playoff teams. I think they all were last year, So one of them, 2 of them went to the NFC title game. One of them won the Super Bowl. That's a tricky division, and maybe that's played part of, maybe they're playing the long game, and that's played part of their thinking. But they've lost their quarterback and not replaced him. I think they pick up Drew Lock in the trade. I can't see Drew Lock being their starting quarterback, but you never know, I suppose. They let go. Who am I thinking of that they let go? Bobby Wagner, they let go. It's kind of some big names for them that are still high performers. They haven't got an amazing running attack. All those years with beast mode. They had Rashad Penny and a couple of other guys last year. Name escapes me. It just feels like DK Metcalf aside, Jamal Adams, they made a big splash for, and I don't think he's probably had the impact that they hoped he would. So I think DK Metcalf aside, there's not a great deal on that roster, that are, you would say a top 10 even at their position. And they've not really done anything. I can't think of any major signings that they've made. I can't think, aside from the trade of Wilson out, I can't think of any, real acquisitions they've made that way. So I just think they're kind of blowing it up, and maybe their long game is that the division's so tough at the minute that those 3 teams will eventually wane off in 5 years or whatever, and that'll be their time to strike, retool for them. But I think it'd be odd thinking to do that. So yeah, they're a loser for me.
Yeah, I've no argument. I think you're spot on. I don't get it. The Bobby Wagner thing particularly, I don't get, because if you want to go younger in key personnel groups, I kind of get that. You know, every team has to, you know, potentially blow it up and start again at certain points. But it's like you say, it feels like a team built around scheme rather than talent. You know, you're talking about DK Metcalf. I'm still not sure quite how good he is. I mean, he flashes, but then he also disappears, you know, for game after game after game with no real significant. And I think he's got all the attributes. I mean, he's like 100 feet tall, you know, and absolutely muscle built from head to toe. I mean, I think he could be an absolute star of the league still. I'm not ready to count him out, but yeah, it feels flat, doesn't it? It feels a bit defeatist. It feels like a season to take stock. I mean, again, I suppose you could argue, who do you replace when you lose Russell Wilson? A bit like we were talking about with who do you replace once you lose Adams in Green Bay. You know, there aren't many of those types of caliber of player about, but there's just so many things here. And you know, the Bobby Wagner release just makes no sense. If he's not at his peak, he's nowhere near far enough away from his peak to think he's the kind of talent you could just let walk. I think, you know, the honourable mention, we didn't really mention the Rams, so I think have worked absolute wonders with their cap space. But Bobby Wagner makes their team better. Letting him walk surely makes the Seahawks worse. Yeah, I've got no argument at all, I don't think. Is there even a shaft of light? You know, any positive signs for Seattle, JB? Can we think of any? Drew Lock certainly isn't one. Noah Fant is a reasonable player at tight end if you need a tight end, I suppose. I don't know. Anything, JB?
Yeah, I think so, because ultimately we have to remember that while there are two eyes in Mr. Unlimited, there is no eye in team. So therefore you can take one piece out and the team remains, especially when that glorious team of Pete Carroll and John Schneider have put a team together previously, unlike any that we have ever seen. As I desperately cling to what I feel was an overconfident and ill-considered bread-based wager.
Oh yeah, you're still back in your argument, aren't you? Okay.
You have to always think there's a light in the darkness for every team, because with parity as close as it can be to a thing in the NFL, you are always only a year or two away from getting better. And the reasons that we know this are because the Kansas City Chiefs drafted Patrick Mahomes, and 3 years later, they're one of the best teams in the league. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers were, I don't want to say an absolute joke, but they won in serious consideration for a dynasty team. And then they got Tom Brady to come over in free agency. We have already talked about the fact that we thought Zach Taylor was an absolute jobber who had got his job through witchcraft and sorcery. And that was kind of proved wrong by actually, you know what, give him actual players and he's pretty good. So you have to look and think, with the history that the Seahawks have got on that coaching staff, that they make some smart decisions in the draft, and there's hope and promise within that.
I love the fact that your main argument that the Seahawks could still be good isn't really to do with the Seahawks. It's that we're terrible predictors. And ultimately, people just shouldn't listen to what any of us say. I mean, that could happen.
The important thing to consider is that no matter what happens with the Seahawks, they won't be the worst team in the league, because the New York Giants are still going to be playing every week.
There is a fair point in there, actually, that you look at a team like the Texans last year, who put together a number of wins, and actually, you know, when they had their starting quarterback in Tyrod Taylor available, actually were competitive most of the time. And you've got to say the Texans felt like they had a bigger hole to dig themselves out of than the Seahawks. I just think in that division, it speaks to how ambitious you might be, or how competitive you might be. But okay, and I'll round us out. The final mention on the podcast is going to be my loser for free agency, and I can't believe this one is still left on the table for me. The Atlanta Falcons. goodness me, gentlemen. So Deshaun Watson is about to sign. It's imminent. It's one of the worst kept secrets in sport that the deal has pretty much been done. Before we get onto Instagram stories with Falcon jerseys in the background, we'll just live in a world where we believe that's going to happen. There are other players on that team who share the same agent, who are tweeting things that are immediately deleted. All of the breadcrumbs you look for seem to point for the fact they were going to have an absolutely generational talent, whatever you might think of what goes on around him, in Deshaun Watson, lining up in the black and white. Then not only do they lose Deshaun Watson, they lose the kind of glow that Watson would have brought. So the rumours were that AJ Green was about to sign. Actually, you mentioned playoff Lenny, didn't you? Leonard Fournette was supposedly on the verge of going to the Falcons. And all of a sudden, not only have you lost any kind of, I don't know, propelling force or any kind of improvement under centre that you might have been able to achieve by nabbing Watson, you lose all of those pieces that would have fallen into place after him. And to be honest, to go from that to within a couple of days, basically screaming from the hills that you are in a rebuild mode, I think is massively problematic. And the reason I think it's massively problematic is to do with the players that remain. And I suppose the comparison piece for me is the Dolphins a few years ago, when everybody knew the Dolphins were happy to trade away their talent for picks in order to rebuild the following year. And you've got to think, what does that do to the players that remain? And I don't know, maybe they will prove me wrong. I'm with you, Phil. I don't think they've necessarily done the worst business at quarterback, but equally, it's just a lost season, isn't it? You know, yes, they'll have picks in a couple of years that give them the opportunity to get better. But I mean, there's 3 or 4 teams we've mentioned who are in that mold. And are the Falcons the best setup even of those? I mean, at least the Seahawks get a load of picks for Russell Wilson. You know, the price that was paid to get Matt Ryan into Indianapolis seems ridiculously cheap in terms of the draft picks offered in exchange. I just think the Falcons are in real trouble. Ridley being suspended is a problem. Gage going is an even bigger problem. And the fact that, yes, there are still players left in free agency. They could still get an AJ Green, I suppose. Julio Jones doesn't feel likely, does it? But these feel like complementary pieces, you know, experienced veterans who you could plug in. You know, I don't think AJ Green is still a wide receiver 1. I don't think Julio Jones will play more than 6 games wherever he ends up. It just feels like the Falcons were all in and then all of a sudden were left with nothing. You know, it feels like the plot of a whodunit, and the Falcons, you know, are left really with no other choice than to blow up what felt for a moment, for a brief glimmer, looked like they could be in a position to be instant contenders.
I kind of have... No, go on, Phil.
I was going to say instant contenders is a little bit of a stretch. Like, even if they got Watson, I don't think, you know, they've not really got any receivers or running games. So I think, you know, Kyle Pitts is arguably he's a prospect, isn't he? He didn't kind of pull up any trees or anything last season. Did he score 1 touchdown or maybe more?
I don't know. Kyle Pitts did all right. I mean, I think he was the second best rookie tight end. I mean, he ended up ending the season hotter than he started. But I mean, I think if you take Pitts, if you add in AJ Green, if you bring in Leonard Fournette, I mean, I think the pieces that were coming with Watson would have transformed them, where I actually, I'm not sure really where they are now. You know, are they in a bridge phase? I just don't know. Nothing really seems to suggest they have much of a, I don't know, do they have any hope going into this season at all? I kind of did this with the last couple. Is the hope for the Falcons?
They'll be bottom of the division, and I don't know what that looks like in the conference, but I could see them being a top 3 pick next year.
Yeah, I just don't get it. I think if you really want Deshaun Watson that bad, you don't let the guy leave the building. Who knows? Maybe Deshaun Watson will not be the player we think when he returns from that lengthy hiatus from the league, and maybe the Falcons will be counting their lucky stars, but it doesn't feel that way now. JB, go on. Some relief other than the fact they're going to be better than the Giants, you think? Some relief for Falcons fans?
I mean, they're having free agency problems, and I feel bad for them, son. They've got 99 problems, but thankfully 22 of them aren't connected to the quarterback they potentially traded for. I think that's the best way that we can put that.
Modern day poet, JB.
Yeah, JB and Jay-Z. It's an embarrassment.
Live very different lives, those two people. I don't think they get compared very often, JB and Jay-Z.
Yeah. One of them's incredibly successful with a beautiful superstar wife, and the other one is on this podcast. It's an embarrassment. It kind of has to be summed up as an embarrassment for the Falcons fans. And like, if you'd have said to Falcons fans, don't worry, okay, with all of your 28-3 stuff, don't worry, right? Give it a bit of time, and eventually people will have moved on from that, because they'll be talking about this instead, because they absolutely mortgaged not just their perceived future, but every bit of credibility they had with their, and I'm going to say this again because we talked about him earlier, MVP quarterback, franchise quarterback, to get a guy who you don't know if is he going to play this year, is he going to play next year, like any and all of this. And it is that kind of thing. When you make a bold move like this, you have to pull it off. And now all they've done is essentially like they've got rid of, they got rid of Julio Jones last year. They got rid of Matt Ryan. Calvin Ridley's out for the year with at least a year with the suspension. And even before then, there was talk of getting rid of Calvin Ridley. And at the time, I kind of said, who are they throwing the ball to? Who's throwing the ball? Who are they throwing it to? What are they doing? And yes, we've talked about like the success Arthur Smith had with a bang average quarterback in Ryan Tannehill in Tennessee. But that was because they had a running back like Derrick Henry to do that. Obviously, Aldrin, our standard draft expert, is not here with us today. But even without his confident knowledge, I feel secure in the fact that there isn't a Derrick Henry in this draft or next year. So like we're talking about like the Seahawks trading Russell Wilson. I have more faith, and this is completely legitimate, not buying into a bit. I have more faith in the Seahawks being able to do anything this season than I have the Falcons. The Falcons look like an absolute dead last team. Sorry, Falcons fans.
I kind of agree they could be better than the Seahawks. I mean, I like Marcus Mariota. I think he was a bit unlucky with how it ended in Tennessee. I think he looked good when he, came in. It was a very small sample size, wasn't it? I think that Monday Night Football with the Raiders jumps out at me, but I don't know. The only thing I fear for Mariota, like I would fear for most quarterbacks going into that situation. I mean, a Carson Wentz, you'd be fearful of in that. Who of the quarterbacks who were in that, deserving of a second chance type quarterback, shown flashes as starters, who do you feel could turn around a team like the Falcons? I'm not sure there are many, if any. But gentlemen, there you go. There was some delight for some fan bases, some pain felt by others. But I think bringing the main bulk of free agency to a close with our winners and losers show, you did a stunning job. The next time we will be together, date to be confirmed due to, burgeoning social lives that we all seem to have during the off-season. We'll be talking about the draft and building up to the absolutely standout offensive, defensive, and occasionally even special teams prospects rolling in this year. But thank you for your company, gents. Stunning job, amazing high-level content. Let's get back together in a little over a week and do it all again.
Just a note to say there are only 3 of us this week because Aldrin gets married on Thursday, the 7th of April. So congratulations.
It feels very personal detail to share in a public forum, but as we've done it, let's do it. Congratulations, Aldrin. Let's hope you listen and have a wonderful day. JB, no comment? No?
Yay.
Yay, weddings. We are genuinely thrilled for him. Nice. Yeah, have an amazing time, gentlemen. Hopefully we will be a quartet by the time we're back together, celebrating that good news and plenty more. But yeah, thanks for your company, gentlemen. Let's do it again soon.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks a lot.
This is a
Remember to subscribe and be cool. Tell your friends.
The game